Welcome to the Falkland Islands. Or possibly Las Islas Malvinas. It's not a matter of translation. It's not like, is this place Alemania or Germany? It's more like, is this place Derry or Londonderry? Are these the Senkaku Islands or the Diaoyu Islands? What name you use often suggests which side you support in the sovereignty dispute. The name of the islands is such a sensitive issue that the UN refers to them as Falkland Islands (Malvinas in English and Islas Malvinas (Falklands) in Spanish. Weirdly, both names derive from people who came from Britain. But which name is the right one? Well, the disputed name of the islands is closely linked to their convoluted and disputed history. For this reason, there are going to be a lot of apparentlys and possiblys and maybes and might-haves in this video, because pretty much everything is disputed by someone. With that in mind, here we go. It's possible that the islands were visited before the 16th century by indigenous Americans, or possibly even the Chinese. But if any of them had names for the islands, they've been lost to history. There are several possible first sightings of the islands by Europeans, including Amerigo Vespucci from Florence in 1501, and French navigator Binot Palmier de Gonville in 1504. But again, no names seem to have been given to the archipelago, although a group of islands located approximately on the right parallel appeared on a map by Martin Waldseemüller in 1507 under the name of Insul de la Pulsera, meaning Isles of Maidens or Virgin Islands. A Portuguese expedition in 1518 spotted islands off the coast of South America, and possibly even sailed down the channel between the islands and landed, but didn't name them. Then in 1520, Estebão Gomes, a Portuguese captain with Magellan's famous Spanish-backed expedition, may have sheltered on the islands that some of the crew named Islas de Sansón y de los Patos, literally meaning Islands of Samson and the Ducks. The name Sansón might have come from that of the ship, the San Antonio, or is possibly related to Ascension Island. And ducks, because ducks. Also in 1520, Johannes Schörner from Bavaria produced a globe showing islands in about the right location, named the Maiden Group, possibly taken from Waldseemüller's earlier map. Then in 1522, Pedro Reinl, a Portuguese cartographer, published a map showing islands in the right location. At around the same time, Piri Reis of the Ottoman Empire also published a map showing what could be the islands, as well as Antarctica. But in both cases, the islands are not named. Several maps were then published in the following years, with a group of islands shown in about the right place named the Sansón Islands. There was a possible landing by Spaniard Alonso de Camargo in 1540 on an expedition sent by the Bishop of Palencia, although the latitude given puts them closer to Rio Negro. There were several more possible sightings by expeditions from various nations, including one by English Captain John Davis in 1591 from the Desire, resulting in the islands being called Davis Land for a little bit, and one by Richard Hawkins in 1593, who named the islands Hawkins Maiden Land. Then in 1600, Vice Admiral Sebald de Weerd of the Dutch East India Company made an accurate charting of the islands for the first time, which means I don't need to say possible or maybe, although we can be pretty certain that other people had spotted the islands before. But we can't be certain of who saw what, and when. Actually, we can't be absolutely certain of de Weerd's sightings. For that matter, we can't be absolutely certain anything has happened, or the universe exists. Oh god. But let's avoid an epistemological crisis and just say the Vice Admiral saw the islands and named them after himself. The Sebaldine Islands. Today this is the Spanish name for a group of islands to the northeast of the archipelago, known in English as the Jason Islands. Now you may have noticed that none of the names so far correspond to either of the names the islands have today. However, that's about to change. Sort of. In 1690, John Strong came to the islands, and made what the British have subsequently called the first recorded landing. Of course, several people might have beaten him to it. He also sailed up the channel between the two islands, which he named in memory of Lucius Carey, a former MP for Newport on the Isle of Wight, who had died at the Battle of Newbury in 1643 during the English Civil War. He was better known as the second Viscount of Falkland. Strong's voyage had been sponsored by Lucius Carey's grandson, Anthony Carey, the fifth Viscount of Falkland, and the Treasurer of the Navy. Viscount Falkland's title comes from the Falkland Palace in Fife, which was the home to several Scottish monarchs, and gets its name from falconry in the area, literally Falkland. Crucially though, John Strong only named Falkland Sound after Carey, not the archipelago. In fact, he probably referred to the islands as Hawkins Land. Although by 1702, the name Falkland Islands, and sometimes Falklands Islands, was appearing on British maps, referring to the archipelago as a whole. At around the same time as Strong's expedition, the islands started to be visited by a group of French privateers and entrepreneurs from a town in Brittany called Saint-Malo, named, unsurprisingly, after St. Malo, a 5th century Welsh clergyman who travelled with St. Brendan. The name Marlow being derived from the Breton words for brilliant and hostage. Why am I talking about a Welsh saint from the Middle Ages? Well, in honour of their home port's namesake, the French privateers named the islands Les Malouines. From the early 18th century onwards, maps started to name the islands as Les Malouines, or the Falkland Islands, and often both. But no one on the islands used either of these names, mainly because there was no one on the islands. This changed in 1764, when Louis de Bougainville from France founded a naval base on the east of the islands called Port St. Louis, after King Louis XV, and also himself, and his ship. And of course the settlers used the French name for the islands, Les Malouines. Just a few months later in 1766, John McBride arrived on the west of the islands with 100 settlers and 25 marines. Seemingly completely unaware of the French settlement, McBride erected several buildings and named the base Port Egmont after the Earl of Egmont. They called the islands the Falkland Islands, and both settlements apparently remained unaware of each other's existence. After protests from the Spanish government, who claimed the islands for reasons to be discussed in a future video, in 1767 France sold their base to Spain. The Spanish changed the name of the settlement from Port St. Louis to Puerto Soledad, Port Solitude, and Les Malouines was translated into Spanish as Islas Malvinas, which soon became Islas Malvinas. What happened when the two settlements on the island eventually met will be the subject of that future video. But for now, here we have the convoluted history of the island's two names. So should it be Falklands or Malvinas? Should the name Malvinas be equated to Malouine? If so, Falklands and Malouine seem to have come around at about the same time, although Malouine was used on the islands themselves first. Should they actually be called the Virgin Islands, or the Sanson, or the Sebaldine? Should it simply be Falklands in English and Malvinas in Spanish? Why are you asking me all these questions? The truth is, it's really not the name that matters, but the side of the sovereignty dispute that each name represents.